Peter Ryan last updated 046 the 23rd of January 2019. Cameron Spencer, Getty Images. Pablo Carreno Busta of Spain shows his frustration after losing his fourth-round match against Kei Nishikori of Japan during Day 8 of the 2019 Australian Open. JAIME LAWSON, Getty Images. Serena Williams of the United States argues with umpire Carlos Ramos during her women's singles finals match against Naomi Osaka of Japan at the 2018 U.S. Open. Jim Nick Kyrios was fined for making lewd gestures in 2018. Sydney Morning Herald. John McEnroe is unhappy with an umpire's decision during Wimbledon in 1980. Getty Images. Chair umpire Arnaud Gobas reacts to getting hit in the eye with a ball hit by Denis Shapovalov of Canada at the Davis Cup in 2017. Matthew Luis. David Nalbandian of Argentina shows his dejection as he is informed of his disqualification for a code violation during his men's singles final round match against Marin Cilic of Croatia in 2012. Matthew Stockman, Getty Images. Serena Williams in her catsuit at the French Open in 2018. Jimmy Connors makes gestures to the Australian Open crowd in 1974. Will Russell even the temperate Roger Federer has been fined for an audible obscenity during his career. Tennis. On September 8, 2018 in New York, Serena Williams erupted on the center court at Flushing Meadows during the U.S. Open final. The target of her ire was 47-year-old Portuguese chair umpire Carlos Ramos, who had the temerity to deliver a series of code violations in Williams' direction during the second set of the now infamous match. Williams didn't quite coin a famous phrase while throwing her tantrum, as John McEnroe did when he screamed the legendary line, "You cannot be serious," as part of an extended rant at chair umpire Edward James while questioning a line call at Wimbledon in 1981. Umpire James awarded a point penalty, or code violation, for the tirade, but her hostile display caused as much controversy as she received code violations for coaching, racket abuse and verbal abuse on her way to losing the match to her more mild-mannered Japanese opponent Naomi Osaka in straight sets, 6-2, 6-4. Read more. Australian Open, Pablo Carreno Busta booed off court after bag-throwing meltdown. Kevin Norquay, it's hard to stop watching the unruly family, as they kick up the racket. There's a very good reason behind the fuss over Serena Williams' flare-up then reverberated around the world as she claimed post-match that gender bias had played a part in the umpire's willingness to penalize her for actions that may have been ignored if committed by a male player. Ad feedback. At the Australian Open this week, an epic meltdown from Pablo Carreno Busta saw the Spaniard throw his bag across the court and scream at the umpire after he lost the fourth-round match. The on-court tantrum followed a furious debate with the umpire over a controversial line call, and for which he received no code violation. Welcome to the murky world of code violations in tennis, where personalities, moods and interpretations coexist with rules to create lively discussion long after tournaments end. So what kind of behavior attracts a code violation? How do umpires know where to draw the line? And where did the penchant for smashing rackets and giving umpires lip all start? But first, do women receive more code violations? I've seen other men call other umpires several things, said Williams. I'm here fighting for women's rights and for women's equality and for all kinds of stuff. For me to say, thief, and for him to take a game, it made me feel like it was a sexist remark. He's never taken a game from a man because they said, thief. Former world number 1 Victoria Azarenka backed Williams. However, the data did not appear to support Williams' claims, as the New York Times listed the number of fines handed out to men and women tennis players in Grand Slams over the past 20 years. What exactly are the Grand Slam rules? The International Tennis Professionals (ITP) Code of Conduct says players must conduct themselves in a professional manner, following rules and regulations set out in a code of conduct. Big no-nos are as follows. Players are not to use words commonly known and understood to be profane and uttered clearly and loudly enough to be heard by court officials and spectators. As far back as 1951, USLTA suspended Earl Kuchel after he was kicked out of the 1951 U.S. Nationals for bad language. Poor old Kuchel tried to grab the umpire's microphone and defend his actions but was not given that opportunity. Even the temperate Roger Federer has been fined for inaudible obscenity during his career, with microphones picking up that he swore when arguing with a chair umpire during the 2009 U.S. Open final. He did not receive the warning but was later fined $1,500 loose change for the Swiss star. The making of signs by a player with his or her hands and/or racket or balls that commonly have an obscene meaning is forbidden. Australian Nick Kyrios was fined $17,000 after impersonating a lewd act with a water bottle at Queen's in 2018. The action was not picked up by the chair umpire but caused outrage on social media as it was captured during the BBC coverage. Any statement about an official, opponent, sponsor, spectator or other person that implies dishonesty or is derogatory, insulting or otherwise abusive is not on. While there have been worse transgressions than Williams calling Ramos a thief and liar, that was enough to breach the code. McEnroe's enraged request to the chair umpire to answer my question, the question, jerk, is the most memorable. Italian Fabio Fognini thought he was being smart speaking in Italian when calling the Swedish chair umpire Louise Engel a whore during the 2017 U.S. Open. The Grand Slam board fined him $96,000 and banned him for 2 Grand Slams but decided to suspend his sentence providing he didn't transgress again. Fognini later apologized for his actions. Unauthorized touching of an official, opponent, spectator or another person is not okay. Spain's David Ferrer was lucky to escape a code violation and a fine when he pushed a linesman out of the way so he could put a towel on the linesman's chair rather than hand it to a ball boy at the 2014 Australian Open. Intentionally hitting the ball dangerously and recklessly out of the enclosure of the court, within the court, or hitting the ball with negligent disregard of consequences is against the rules. Dismayed Canadian Denis Shapovalov was disqualified after he tried to smash a ball out of the court in frustration during a Davis Cup tie but instead hit chair umpire Arnaud Gabez in the head with the ball. The poor, unsuspecting Gabez later required surgery as the impact left him with a fracture of the orbital bone under his left eye. Shapovalov apologized and was subsequently fined $7,000 for the incident, with the ITF choosing not to hand down the maximum $12,000 fine as the action was not deemed intentional. It all makes Federer's sage advice in February 2017 more relevant: you have to be careful. When you whack a ball out of stadiums, you want to be 100% sure you're clear of everything in the path, even birds and stuff. If you throw the racket, you want to know how it bounces. If it's the unknown, you shouldn't do it. Players shall not violently or with anger hit, kick or throw a racket or other equipment. Now, as cliched as a guitarist destroying equipment at the end of a show, racket smashing was happening before the Open era started in 1968, with the New York Times reporting that U.S. professional Chuck McKinley earned a 3-month suspension in 1960 for tossing a racket. It has since become the active choice for frustrated tennis players. Marcos Baghdadi's effort to destroy 4 rackets in one sitting at the 2012 Australian Open was a high point, with his tantrum eventually earning a code violation. Players shall not receive coaching during a match. Communication of any kind, audible or visible, between a player and a coach may be construed as coaching. Williams coach, Patrick Mouratoglou, admitted he was coaching Williams during the 2018 U.S. Open final when Ramos spotted him and gave Williams a warning for a code violation. That laid the foundation for what was to follow, as Williams thought the umpire's call impugned her character. The game is in a quandary over whether coaching should be banned. The Women's Tennis Association, WTA, lets coaches speak to players during changeovers. Players should at all times conduct themselves in a sportsmanlike manner and give due regard to the authority of officials, rights of opponents, spectators and others. Argentina's David Nalbandian kicked an advertising hoarding that ricocheted into a linesman's shins. This catch-all category was employed to abruptly end the 2012 final at Queen's, with Argentina's David Nalbandian automatically disqualified for unsportsmanlike conduct after he kicked an advertising hoarding that ricocheted into a linesman's shins, injuring the umpire. A player shall use his best efforts to win a match when competing in an ITF Pro Circuit tournament. Australian bad boy Kyrios sails as close to the wind as anyone when it comes to this rule and has been fined before for effectively not trying. The Australian's reputation chair umpire Mohamed Al-Lahyani encouraged Kyrios to keep trying rather than warning him for lack of effort during last year's US Open. Each player shall dress and present herself for play in a professional manner. Clean and customarily acceptable tennis attire shall be worn. This rule covers shoes, sponsorship and logos, rackets, bags and headbands. A breach leads to a minimal fine, but players can be told to change the attire before playing. The rules on attire have relaxed over time, but controversy continues, generally with what officials consider it acceptable for females to wear. Williams' catsuit at the 2018 French Open raised eyebrows, and the rules changed after she wore the suit, which she said was designed to help her combat blood clots. French officials said the suit did not respect the game and it would not be allowed in 2019. The best example of apparent double standards relating to dress came when France's Elise Cornet copped a code violation for changing her back-the-front shirt on court just before serving in the 2018 US Open, a decision tournament officials later corrected. When issuing violations to players during matches, umpires give a warning for a first offense, penalize them 1 point for a second offense, with the third and subsequent offenses leading to the loss of a game. By this stage, the tournament official has probably loomed courtside. A maximum of 20 seconds in women's and 25 seconds in men's is allowed to elapse from the moment the ball goes out of play at the end of the point until the time the ball is struck for the first serve of next point. In other words, no wasting time. The new rule, designed to speed up play, has been introduced to the Australian Open for the first time, with 90 seconds allowed for the change of ends and 120 seconds allowed for a set break. How it is enforced remains open to question. WHO are the worst offenders of all time? Data on which players receive the most code violations is not available, but the blame for all this bad behavior is laid at the feet of Americans, McEnroe and Jimmy Connors, and Romanian Elina Stace, who were at the peak of their powers in the 1970s and 1980s. The trio's actions led to the International Tennis Federation introducing a code of conduct in 1975, following on from the Britain Lawn Tennis Association's (LTA) efforts to maintain control over behavior post-war. The LTA began in 1947 to publish rules of etiquette for players. It's doubtful this tantrum-throwing trio took much notice. On reflection, many argue, the conditions were ripe for those individuals to engage in such scene-setting behavior as money flowed into the game when the Open era began in 1968, with the notions of what was acceptable in the genteel game of tennis being constantly challenged as the world watched on via television. Sponsors, managers, equipment suppliers and media partners all stood to benefit from the more brash environment, with professional and commercial sport also attracting players with different backgrounds and attitudes. Those who have followed McEnroe, Connors and Stace in behaving badly have been mere imitators compared to these trailblazers. How much wriggle room is there for umpire discretion? Australian Richard Ings was a professional chair umpire between 1986 to 1994 and the executive vice president for rules and competition for the ATP Tour from 2000 to 2005. He backed Ramos' decision-making in the 2018 US Open Women's Final and believes the code has a positive effect on the game overall. The principal role of the chair umpire is to use the code to control the match, and controlling the match doesn't just mean making one player happy. It means making the competition fair for both players, Ing said. The amount of discretion available to umpires is often reduced at Grand Slam tournaments compared to off-Broadway events, as every moment and word is captured and broadcast to a huge television audience. As part of a chair umpire's training and development, they view footage of contentious incidents and are asked to give an indication of how they would manage the situation. Quite often the answer is, "It depends," Ng said. Because you look at an incident that happens in isolation and it may not look so bad, but then you look at the overall match and you see incidents previous to that and think no, you can't show discretion there because a few games earlier the player did this or the player did that, so there is a pattern of behavior that leads to a code violation." Federer told Eurosport in September that players except different umpires might see similar incidents differently. Every umpire has their own style, it's just how it is in any sport. In tennis, you might have an umpire that gives more coaching violations and another guy goes more to time violation, Federer said. You might get one guy who knows that this guy misbehaves quite often, so I'll give him a warning kicker, or I'll be more lenient with a guy because he's a nice guy and just can't control himself. I think it really depends on the situation, Ng says. The analogy that I like to use is that a code violation in tennis is like a yellow card in soccer, Ng said. What other sanctions are there on bad behavior? Tournament directors determine whether financial sanctions or suspensions are appropriate after reviewing violations or other incidents that happen in matches. Williams received a $17,000 fine for the incidents in the U.S. Open final, with the tournament fining her $10,000 for the verbal abuse of Ramos, $4,000 for being warned for coaching and $3,000 for smashing her racket. Aggravated behavior was the basis on which Kyrios was fined $25,000 in 2015 for making lewd remarks about Wawrinka's girlfriend. Serious incidents lead to players being charged with a major offense of aggravated behavior, which was the basis on which Kyrios was fined $25,000 in 2015 for making lewd remarks towards opponent Stan Wawrinka. He was also threatened with suspension if his behavior continued. Of course, a player's personal brand is always at risk when they behave poorly during a match. However, sponsor reactions are unpredictable. After all, would the squeaky clean Pat Rafter sell more rackets than the unpopular but always newsworthy Kyrios? Sydney Morning Herald.